All right. So next up is our first talk, and our speaker is Nočnica. Her charity is Sisters of the Road, which will be featured in the Discord. And her favorite cartoon is The Midnight Gospel, which I'm a big fan of, personally. And the title of her talk today is No Dev is an Island, How to Do Serverless Together. And frankly, I'm ready to not be an island anymore. I don't know about you all in quarantine, but let's be together. So with that being said, everyone, please give a very warm chat and Discord welcome to our first speaker, Nočnica.
Hey, thank you, everybody. How's my audio? Everyone can hear me okay? Kate, give me a thumbs up if I sound good. If I sound smooth. Thank you so much, Kate, for running all this, for getting all these speaker details, for doing all this organization. Super duper appreciate it. Okay, so my name again is Nočnica. Nika is fine. I promise not to make fun of you for being unable to pronounce Nočnica. I work for New Relic as a dev advocate for serverless, and you can find me on Twitter at Nočnica. There's a link to that in the Discord as well. My talk is going to be a little bit shorter. It's not going to go all the way to that 30 minutes. So if we do have questions about serverless, please do type those into the serverless Q&A chat, because I'd love to have that discussion while we're here. So my avatar is going to pace back and forth uncomfortably in a way to simulate what it is like to watch me give any talk at any time. So yeah, I work for New Relic doing serverless. Did you know that New Relic did serverless monitoring? A lot of people don't, but I just started at New Relic, so I'm going to be working on kind of socializing that one out there. Does fantastic serverless monitoring, but that's all we're going to say about New Relic for today. So when I sat down to really try to write out what this talk was about, I came up with a slightly new title for it, which is that serverless is hard for teams. And by the way, as a note, if you don't do serverless now, this talk will be super useful because there's obviously lots of discussion about serverless as a platform technique, as a way of hosting new services, which means you have to say the word serverless services, but we'll get through it. This is definitely going to be also about the evaluation of whether or not it's a good idea to use serverless, or what makes sense for your team. So the difficulties of serverless, it really does present some pretty unique challenges for working with a team. Once you move beyond the lone developer working in her garage, serverless has some pretty unique difficulties. And to start with, let's just take a moment to step backwards and say, okay, what are we talking about when we say serverless? Serverless is just a concept for letting a vendor worry about almost every detail of how our platform works. And we're worrying about just the sort of business logic at the very center of our application. So that's that function code that you give to some serverless platform, and then it worries about how to start things, how to run things, all of those details. When we say serverless, we should not just be talking about one particular thing, which is in this case AWS Lambda, the serverless function system that is semi-synonymous with serverless. And in fact, in this talk, I'll probably switch back and forth between saying serverless and AWS Lambda, so I'm guilty of this as well. The fact is that serverless does not just exist on one vendor. There are multiple vendors, all of them offering serverless tools. And even on AWS, serverless is not just something that covers Lambda. There's a bunch of services that are serverless, a bunch of products that are serverless within AWS. Lambda sort of sits at the core of that, since that's where our function code happens. So it's a lot of what I'll be talking about today. But yeah, the world of serverless, or the concept of serverless, again, serverless is just a concept about the responsibilities for who handles what. So yeah, it's bigger than just AWS Lambda. So let's get on to the problems. The first one is kind of a special breed of fragmentation that occurs with serverless. So once we leave all these platform details to the vendor, we should be empowering our development teams, our sort of code writing teams, to go out and release new services all the time. That's very much the move fast and break things sort of ethos, should be really empowered by serverless. And hopefully we're going to have these teams create new little microservices that either replicate or improve on pieces of the big monolith that we're trying to move away from. And the problem becomes that we then start to have a subset of our production services that only one team of developers really understands. So where once we had this monolith, which we all know is bad for sort of, we don't need to dive into why my monoliths might not be great, where once we had a monolith, now we sort of have the Tower of Babel, where nobody can talk to each other, nobody knows exactly how other pieces work, and that is obviously is an issue. So this is one, the next slide is one of several that is not specific to serverless. It's sort of more an issue with AWS in general, but really comes up with serverless where we're trying to empower small teams to release new services. The IAM permissions and permission settings really are pretty difficult. They are a hassle. So there's not really a lightweight way to let someone build a first few services. Even if you just want to set up an AWS Lambda, your function code, and hook it up to a database, to get that to work right, you have to have a pretty complete understanding of IAM roles and permissions to make that work. The only half measure is like granting everybody and everything admin permissions and, you know, giving every single person the rights to run up $20,000 bills overnight on your AWS account. So it is tough to find a middle ground there. So that's a pretty significant issue with just going whole hog with serverless. And then the next is that testing is well, you can read it, but the testing is kind of non-existent. The process of developing a Lambda feels like working on any other application code, right? You can commit to a repo, you can connect your, Git repository up to your serverless function, you can deploy to production, but testing wasn't really any part of that. When you sort of get a basic tutorial, you're not going to see testing even mentioned. The very tools that you used to have to do functional testing of your code, anything beyond kind of the most basic unit testing, probably starts with standing up a server that your code should run. Well, no, not anymore. Right now, your application code is just these little functions that need to exist inside of a Lambda to be used correctly. So while there are some tools for running maybe that Lambda correctly, how does that code work inside of like a cloud platform? We'll touch on that a little more later, but and there's definitely, while you can set things like environment variables and other sort of production-y stuff about your Lambda code, there's no place in the AWS Lambda dashboard to say, okay, how do you want to test this? And point me at your tests that you're going to run on this code before you release it. So by default, right, that testing is not just a out of the can thing. I have to move my avatar because my hands are starting to move, but I need to pace uncomfortably. That's an important element of the experience. Okay. So, and then here's the last one, and it's a big one. This is it's one of the very authoritative statistics. 0% of managers like explaining why you ran up an AWS bill. And this is actually an interesting thing. I don't know if I'm going to dive that deeply into it, but the fact is that when a lot of people have these experiences where they try some stuff out in AWS, they run up a bill for like $36. And somehow there just end up being like 12 emails that go back and forth about their $36 bill this month. And it's like, oh, that's confusing, because we all had this big team lunch that must have cost about $3,000. And somehow, the $36 I spent setting some stuff up is a really big issue. Like there's a bunch of reconciliation questions and explanation and all this. And the answer I generally get from managers is that the issue is that it's just kind of the surprise for them at the end of the month. It's not like, oh, hey, this is our budget for this and this is what we're going to spend. So, but yeah, that can present real trouble. In fact, I think that a lot of people have experiences. Okay, they stand up a few databases, or a couple of database tables. They stand up some functions, they run them a little bit, and it becomes such a hassle justifying that tiny expense that they're like, oh, well, I shouldn't mess around with AWS anymore. Like, that's not a place for me to do experiments. I should just experiment locally on my laptop, which doesn't accurately simulate what serverless is going to be like when they actually run it. So And that's the wrong message. So we need to work on that a little bit. Okay, so what are some of the solutions to these? We want to start with a human solution. I hope you all saw Elijah Wood hopping into some random person's Animal Crossing island this week. It was one of the things that brought me joy this week, so I wanted to share it with you all. So let's talk about some of the human solutions to handling this. So when we're talking about this fragmentation, this Tower of Babel sort of effect, we really need to document the why of our stack. AWS gives us really good insight into what's going on technically with our stack. So what two services are connected, what methods are they using, and how are they communicating, how frequently? Those are things that AWS should just be able to tell you, right? But why is it configured this way is, of course, totally absent in any stack. This more severely so, right? There's no place to stick in a little text file, a little config file, a couple of comments. So you really need to sit down and do a little bit of documentation of why is something configured this way. And to do that right, I would really encourage you to try some radical honesty in your documentation. So it doesn't feel great to write down in a document, Susan set up this whole stack. Susan left 6 months ago, and none of us feel smart enough to touch it or affect it. It works great, but no one really understands it well enough to modify it. That's not as fun to write down, but it is so helpful. It is so helpful for a new developer. One that really stands out to me is there was a comment at the top of a line of code. This isn't about serverless, it's just about being a developer, but there's a comment at the top of a chunk of code that said, here is a section of code written by one of the two co-founders of the company. It still works. It does something very complicated in SQL, which it explained what its purpose was. And yeah, nobody here feels really comfortable going in and touching it a little bit. So here's a bunch of SQL directly in our source code where it should not be. And abandon all faith, abandon all hope, ye who enter here. And by reading that, I knew that I wasn't just going to be able to change a few characters and fix the problem that we had, that I would have to sit down and rewrite the whole thing. So that was enormously helpful. So I think all of us here think that Charity Majors is a genius, and so this is one of the many places that I will read from that playbook, which is, you have to embrace some experimentation. And I don't mean experimentation within your team. I mean experimentation with your users. Well, maybe experimentation on your users. Okay, things that can be indicative of this is being willing to deploy on Fridays, being willing to say, hey, how many users were affected by this odd behavior or something. You really need to accept that some unexpected secondary effects or some performance that was not ideal, the way that you're going to find it is by seeing it happen to your users, and that you're going to use some of the powerful tools that we have to roll back when necessary. And that's why we should go deeper with this, is right. Once we're on serverless, we should really have super duper powerful tools to say, go back to the previous version like that. So yeah, so we really want to embrace that experimentation. And we have to establish some trust here. Again, this issue with creating big new costs and saying, oh my gosh, where did this $200 bill come, and why did it come, and what's going to go on? You have to go and make some space in your budget once you're starting to let your DevOps people loose within AWS. You have to say, hey, there's going to be this. It's not going to be more than X amount of dollars. There's really good ways to control, hey, it's not going to go beyond a certain point, but you have to create some space for that variability. And some people who want to do, expenses and accounting, they want you to predict 3 months early exactly what everything's going to cost. And, you got to make room for this, right? You don't know exactly what the sandwiches are going to cost all the team lunches every single, week. So, this is another area where you have to create some of that space. Separate accounting, this is like the second bullet point on here, which is invisible, which don't worry about it. Run, so it's too tiny, but using separate AWS accounts to create some kind of sandboxing for your users is great. And I'm not even going to cover the last one. The text was too tiny. It's fine. We're moving on. Moving on to the good stuff. I was so nervous practicing this that I got through it all about 8 minutes. So this is just fantastic that we're almost at 15. Oh, we're doing great. So tools do also matter. I didn't know about golden tools until a couple days ago, so I'm excited. I think I'm on my way to get a golden axe, so I'm excited. Um, so there's a human side to this, and the human side is the big side. Um, that is the comm side. That is the culture side, and then it's also the side that hopefully the changes that we discussed. Documenting the why and creating some trust within your team and embracing experimenting on your users. Those are things that will be helpful whether or not you stick with serverless, whether or not you ever use serverless. They'll be useful on your team. This is sort of more tooling specific stuff that's specific to serverless. So the first one, and this is a huge one, you have to embrace infrastructure as code. AWS has this beautiful console where you can make all these infrastructure settings, how you want, for example, your Lambdas to be configured, how much memory you want them to have, and how you want them to be connected. When you make a setting inside that console, you have just reduced the number of people who understand your code fully to one. It's just you, right? And teams really do end up with these hugely long documents saying, hey, make sure you go through here and click this and set this to 3. And when you create a new Lambda, set this over here. Oh boy, that's going to be tough to maintain long term. So you really want to embrace tools to keep all of that config stored within your code repository. So a big one for that is AWS CloudFormation, which produces, you use with templates to say, hey, this template is how we want this stack to be configured. There are 2 benefits to that. One, hopefully you can go and read that config template and see what it's doing, though to be honest, in many production environments, that template stretches to hundreds and hundreds of lines, so it's a little tough. But the other big benefit is that when you have it in your own repository, you can see a commit history to it. So when you're sitting there looking at why things are breaking, you can just go back and look and see, hey, here's what happened, or just here's the changes that are aligned in time. So CI/CD is just as doable with serverless stacks as it is with your own servers. So while testing presents some special difficulties, there's nothing stopping you from running automated processes every time you're trying to release serverless code. There are some issues as it stands right now, mainly around what I mentioned, which is how you simulate that serverless environment. Which, how do you say, hey, this is where this code is running? There are pretty good tools now to run just the Lambda code on its own, but the issue becomes, usually your Lambda is going to make something like a database call, and there's not great ways when you have a nice serverless database like DynamoDB to simulate those calls that are going to go to DynamoDB and come back. So you either have to use a third-party set of tools, or you have to sit down and mock all of those database requests to do testing effectively. So those are special cases that require a little bit of pre-work. Tools like Stackery and Serverless Framework are both ways that you can create that simulated environment a little better. And then canaries are huge. So if we're gonna experiment on users, we have to have a way to go back, and hopefully we don't want to experiment on all our users all at once. So CloudFormation has really nice tooling to do Canary deploys right from inside the config. So you can say inside the config file, you can say, hey, only release this to X percentage of users. Let's say only release this to 10% of the running Lambdas, and go watch this metric. And if the metric starts climbing, roll back. Otherwise, release to everybody over the course of an hour, and continue to watch this metric to change. So it's neat. And so that's absolutely something that you need to do. It's not a very heavy process anymore. It's not some huge operations process to get either whatever you call them, Canary deploys or blue-green deploys working. And then finally, you want to do some planning for observability as much as possible. So if you take the time to put in some points within your code while you're writing it to say, hey, how am I going to see what's going on inside here? How am I going to measure performance and see what's going on? By default, AWS and the other serverless toolkits just tell you, well, here's when your function started, where its virtual environment started, and here's when it stopped. And that time can be climbing or falling, and maybe that's good or bad. but that doesn't give you a very accurate view of what's going on with your users. Maybe your function returned something to the user halfway through its runtime and then did something else for a little bit. So you're just not going to see that at all. And certainly if you say like, hey, this method, this chunk of time is what's taking the most time, that's just not visible at all, by default. So, okay, I guess I get one more plug for New Relic there, right? New Relic is one of several tools that is super good for giving you some insight into what's going on inside of that code. And the sooner that you install a tool like that and make some thought about what you really care about going on in your application code, the better off you're going to be. This example that I have on the screen is a beautiful orchard that you can't see anything in, and it's just going to be a nightmare to actually use. So let's take some time to think about that. All right, that's been my stuff. Again, I'm Nočnica. You can find me at Nočnica Fee on Twitter if you have other questions. But yeah, let's see what's in the speaker chat. Not speaker chat, speaker Q&A.
The speaker Q&A does have a couple questions for you, Nika.
Hey, awesome.
You've certainly hit on something with some of the folks here, and there was a lot of comments just generally about IAM hurting people's hearts. But so one question regarding testing. Yeah. Have you tried any of the built-in testing for serverless framework?
I am not that deep on serverless framework. So I just came to New Relic from Stackery, which is like a serverless framework competitor. So that was really the one that I knew a lot better. There are some great testing modules. I would say the serverless application model, or SAM, from AWS actually presents like a lot of useful functionality right from a command line interface to run your Lambdas and simulate more than just the Lambda itself. They'll simulate like the API gateway and a few of the other pieces. They won't simulate. Oh, I'm forgetting to pace nervously. Hold on. Let me pace nervously to catch up. They won't simulate the like databases and a couple of other components that
give
just
you some
don't
space here.
Can't rationally be simulated quite as well.
That's fair.
I love this. Writing good documentation that's essential components. I have read this before. It's a really good post. So everybody go in and look at this. How to write good documentation. I like this.
Yeah. Do you have any general advice for writing, like outside of this is a great resource? Do you have any general advice for writing docs that are honest without being like dissertations?
Yeah, it is an interesting thing. I think that in general, I would look for a serverless stack, look for a map of your services that is handmade and that includes some notation about why this is working this way and literally answers the question like, it feels so obvious the first time you do it, right? This Lambda is connected to this database to load user records, right? Mm-hmm. But just take the time to write that down, right? And hopefully you can come back and note that further. I think that a full documentation solution does not yet completely exist, right? Because some of this stuff is so observable within the map. And so things like comments in your CloudFormation template are possible. There are ways to do that. But yeah, so those are some of the 2 sets of docs it can be super useful. One which is, hey, here's what the relationships are. The another one is like, here's how we got here.
Yeah.
I haven't tried the serverless. I'm just looking through the other. So serverless solutions will always rely on some kind of platform as a service. Totally true. So let me go back to that definition of serverless in my last couple of minutes. Serverless is you are looking at a bunch of platform considerations and you are shipping those off to a vendor and you're saying the vendor is going to worry about this. Now, I will tell you that some people with more experience than I have mentioned that every technology in the past ever has had the buzzword, just focus on business logic, just focus on business logic. Sunblade Microsystems, focus on business logic, 1997, right? But as a general principle, serverless is not, serverless is Lambdas or this technology or this server farm or anything. Serverless is, hey, we're going to make the vendor worry about all of this stuff, and they'll handle things like spinning up new instances for this code. They'll handle running the code. We will just write the code that handles those events. So I would say, this is not the topic of this talk, but if you think, oh, you can do serverless yourself, you can do serverless within your own server farm. No, you cannot. That is, I don't know what that is. That's a cool thing. But if you're trying to figure out like a definition for the term, it is much more about you're shipping these concerns off to a vendor and much less about exactly like how your code is written, how your code is entered, how it does event-based.
I will say one of the things I wrote down specifically from your talk was document the why. I just think for me, that was like a really great takeaway, because I have written a lot of how-to docs in my life, but they're not always that helpful, right?
Yeah. And, you know, also the ways that we deploy can shift pretty quickly in serverless. So that for sure is a consideration.
Yeah.
Okay. Anywho, thank you so much for your time, everybody. I'll give us a little bit of passing time and step off.
Nika, thank you so much. Everyone, please give a clap, give a virtual clap, give a shout out. Nika, that was great. Thank you so much.